Welcome back to another episode of Agents of Change with your host, Dmitry Loukine from Humanize AI. And today I'm joined by one of my more favorite individuals that's come into our orbit over the last couple of years, a man by the name of Shariq Khwaja, who is an independent fractional CTO here in Melbourne. So first and foremost, a big warm welcome. G'day, Shariq. How's it going?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I don't know why we haven't done this sooner.
Oh, I know. I think what popped into our heads about a week ago. So why not? Strike while the iron is hot.
Yeah, happy days. Well, I think just for everyone's benefit, would love to get a bit of an intro on your background and how you've kind of got to this role as an independent fractional CTO. You've obviously seen the best and the worst of the tech industry through your career. Just one look at the LinkedIn profile will show that as well. So, would love to get a bit of a snapshot of your background.
Oh, sure. So how did I fall into fractional CTOing? Well, yeah, I fell into fractional CTOing. I think probably, what was it, about the tail end of 2022, I decided to take a little bit of a break. Did some off-roading, 4x4ing, bit of coaching. And I think towards the tail end of 23, I got tapped on the shoulder by a good friend of mine who just walked out of a meeting with some founders whose company had collapsed around them. They needed some help, really just presenting their organization to the board in order to get some more investment and move the process forward. And then since then, things have just grown, networking, meeting more people, being able to actually help startups specifically solve some of their technology issues. How do we get started? How do we scale? How do we stop things from falling apart? So I think that's probably how I got started. It was completely by accident, and it's been a really happy accident.
Yeah. Well, those are the best ones. And you've obviously got, leading up to this, you've been in the banking industry, coming from the UK. You've done some Big Four consulting and that sort of thing as well. Any fond memories of that time? Do you look back and were there any kind of pivotal moments that kind of set you up for success and to where you are right now?
Oh wow, that's a tiny question. I think the biggest change in my outlook and trajectory was when I left my first organization, a small little company called Matrix Data, who was in Drury Lane in London, just in sort of theatre district. So I'd been working there for a good 7 or 8 years as a data engineer, doing lots of software development in low-level languages like C. But I was lucky enough to stumble across a nice fellow called Peter Pullane, who talked to me about joining the London Stock Exchange as a program director for some of their trading platforms. So my first question to him was, "You might need to tell me what trading is, so we can actually so I can actually understand what the organization does." But that was a phenomenal opportunity because it was my first experience working a significantly larger organization, a regulated organization, and that gave me a lot of exposure to how the world of finance actually works. And then since then, it was just a natural progression, moving into a consulting company, doing some work for a retail bank, and then, moving to Australia, joining KPMG, running their digital platform. So I think that was probably the biggest pivotal role for me, moving from software engineering into running things for a stock exchange.
Yeah, that's a big leap. And sometimes that's where the biggest growth happens, right? When you kind of just dropped into a new environment and don't necessarily have that background to back you up. I think you learn quick in a sink or swim type mentality.
Oh, absolutely. I think there was a baby on the way and software engineering master's dissertation due. So it was nothing like a little bit of a challenge to mix things up.
Yeah. I think, some of the discussions we have on a almost kind of fortnightly basis as what the hell is going on with AI. And I think, kind of our perceptions based on the discussions we're having with our clients and partners and networks, there's a lot going on, and I think the reason we kind of started this podcast was just to give people a true sense of what is actually happening, what are people seeing who are actually in the thick of it at the moment as well. So would love to get a view from your seat, over the last maybe 6 months or maybe 3 months. What have you noticed? Where have there been some shifts and changes in terms of the way you approach your services in the market?
Well, sure. So I think the biggest perception change for me personally was bundling the AI hype with all of the previous hype cycles before, like the likes of blockchain. Blockchain was peak hype cycle probably around 2016, 2017.
Yep.
And it just kind of fizzled out. Apologies to any blockchain enthusiasts out there, but for me, it was a bit of a down the squib. And the initial thinking was, the hype around AI is going to be roughly the same, but it's really taken off, embedded in a lot of organizations in various different guises. So, now that I've been working with organizations and in organizations that have been heavily AI focused, I think I've really just broken it down into three areas. So we've got the AI assisted engineering, which is probably something most engineers are familiar with, having VS Code and Claude Code or Codex or something running along, writing code for you. And you're asking it questions. And then you've got the application engineering, actually building LLM-based applications using maybe the Claude SDK or connecting directly to Gemini or any of the other model providers. And then you've got the business automation. So business automation, i.e., connecting up again, the likes of Claude Cowork or Copilot to your internal systems, having it hoover up all of your data, maybe turning it into a smart executive assistant that gives you digests every morning. So, my universe and ecosystem gravitates, around the AI assisted engineering and, more recently LLM-based applications. So what I've seen with AI assisted engineering, that there's a massive spectrum. You've got the people who are still, just operating in sort of autocomplete mode, and then the people who've sort of drunk the Kool-Aid and going in and actually getting the coding harnesses to generate code for them, to generate prototypes. Then the next level of that is actually using it for production code, things that all actually hit. And then you've got the example where you've got organizations that are actually building real applications and prototypes using the coding harnesses. The part of this which I'm enjoying the most, though, is just taking it to the absolute next level. So it's something that you've probably heard of called the dark factory model. So the dark factory model is the aim where developers aren't touching code, going in from prompts and acceptance criteria through to code that maybe a human can review into production. So that's been a really enjoyable, albeit roller coaster or ride. If that's it's probably worth elaborating on that a little bit, but maybe if I just touch on the application engineering part. The application engineering part, again, is probably a little bit more nebulous for a lot of engineers themselves. What is application engineering in the context of AI versus just using AI to generate my code? So the easiest way to think about it is you're writing code that happens to include an SDK, and that SDK is something that talks to the likes of Claude or DeepSeek or OpenAI. And the reason I'm just talking in terms of an SDK, you don't have to use an SDK, but it's just a slightly easier way of explaining to people how you're going to use something. So the second you start thinking of it in terms of an SDK, you can say, okay, what do I use it for and what can I do? And of course, the most effective way of using LLMs for applications is to actually think about a problem you can't solve anyway other than probabilistically. Mm-hmm. So asking questions of data or building an application where users can interact with and your data set or your business in free text is very, very enticing, but ensuring that you're protecting your prompts from prompt injection, making sure that the LLM is actually very focused on what it's producing is super important. And that's where a really solid engineering mindset comes in. So rather than thinking about talking to a chatbot, you're actually thinking in terms of inputs and outputs. If I'm sending a prompt, what am I expecting to get out? How will I test it? How will I make sure that if it's going to give me data, regardless of the words it might use, are the numbers still correct? What kind of hallucination am I going to be dealing with? Am I dealing with something where it's misinterpreting data it has, or it's just making things up in the absence of data? How do I make sure that it's secure? What sort of agentic prompt injection harnesses do I need to create? Sometimes you can just get Claude to fight with itself. Say, hey, test this prompt, but you'd want to be significantly more structured in your approach by having test cases, spec files that include all of the sort of test cases and edge cases that you wish to test in your LLM engineering application. So on the one hand, people are a bit scared about what LLM engineering or AI engineering actually is. So my only advice would be take a step back, think you're an engineer, you think in terms of inputs and outputs and testability, treat this exactly the same. And then the other part of this, which is related to business automation, I find that very, very interesting because a lot of messaging from boards and senior execs has the right intention. I've read that using AI will be better, using AI will increase productivity. And my only observation there is if you can measure something, then it's real. And if you can't measure something, then it's a guess. How can I add value in an organization assisting with business automation? And the first question I ask is, hey, what are we looking to get out of this? And how are we going to measure it? Are we looking at number of complaints per unit time or resolution of customer queries per unit time? Are we looking at hours spent on task? Were we measuring it before? Are we going to measure it now? So from my viewpoint, I think it just all goes back to, are we measuring something? If we can measure something, then we can understand if the impact is good or bad. How long does it take to get a feature out the door that has an acceptable level of quality? How long does it take to do a task, review a document? How long are developers spending writing code versus writing tests versus fixing issues? And from a purely business standpoint, how much time are we spending fixing outputs in documents versus actually writing those documents themselves?
Yeah, a lot to digest there as well. And you can probably imagine why it's so hard to make the transition from the playbook that's got you to this point to the playbook that's required to get you to where you're going as well. You've probably had many discussions with the engineers that are skeptical or resistant or don't necessarily want to make that jump across. Have you seen jump across to maybe this AI native delivery kind of mindset, dark factory model, et cetera, et cetera? How do you see this playing out if you have a team where there's people resisting and then there's this team of people innovating and leaning into the newer technology? Like, how does that play out? Because you've probably been through the revolution when cloud first came in and blockchain, and there's so many different ways of working, and the traditional way, whether it's 2 pizza teams or 1 pizza teams, like that's all changing, and I think changing very quickly as well. How do you make that transition, and what needs to be true to make that transition?
No, it's a really, really good question. What I'm personally seeing is a lot of AI assisted engineering is great at cranking out code, but the reason you're doing it in the first place is to solve a business problem. Maybe delivering a new product or service for your customers or your clients, or improving a process that exists in some sort of legacy form. Now, in traditional software development, at least back in sort of enterprise days, or probably still existing in enterprise, analysis, requirements, design, build, test, release, iterate.
Yeah.
And that could take months. It could even take years. And you'd have an army of people. You might have a business analyst or 2 or 3. You might have some project managers, technical team leads, a scrum master, engineers, testers, and so on and so forth. But it all hinges on the very beginning, which is what's the business problem I'm trying to solve?
Mhm.
And then how am I going to architect something that solves those problems? How am I going to make it resilient? All the new tooling and the new way of doing things does is it compresses those timelines significantly. But the key differentiator is it still, it compresses those timelines. The common factor, though, is the number of interactions with different sorts of skill set and different domains that you have, the more complicated your product and your project. So what I mean by that is if an analyst has to hand off to an engineer, or an engineer has to take instructions from an architect, or there's a designer involved, and the designer still has to get involved in making things happen. That's all well and very well and good, and you might compress your timescales. But if you're operating in something like a dark factory model, it's ever increasingly important for the person at the terminal, for the person actually doing the work, to have a very good understanding of all of these different domains, rather than having to go off and ask people things. Being effective in requirements gathering, or talking to someone and saying, how do you feel about your problem? What does a good user experience look like for you? Or being able to say, okay, these are the things I need to be able to test. So in other words, you're taking an entire delivery team and you're trying to compress this down into one or two people who can operate at speed. And that's the sticking point.
Mhm.
It's a very, very steep learning curve, especially for someone who hasn't been doing this, someone who's been embedded in a team of other people who've been bringing their skills to the table to truly excel and to truly be able to accelerate your output and to add more value. Having that rounded understanding of all parts of, let's say, software development lifecycle or product development is becoming increasingly important. And it's sink or swim. The engineers that are succeeding are the ones that are taking a step back and realizing that I no longer am being paid to write code because I've got something that can write code for me. What I'm now being paid for is to understand what I'm trying to solve.
Mhm.
How can I communicate with the rest of the organization so that A, I understand what they need, and B, when I or my agent or my agentic team is producing something, that is of an acceptable level of quality. Because that's been something that you're effectively outsourcing to the rest of your team before.
Mhm.
So where the difficulty isn't in understanding what is required, it's actually to start growing those skills. If you've been a software engineer for 10, 20 years, and all of a sudden you're having to become a designer and a business analyst and an architect, that can be very, very daunting. And it's not something that everyone can do. So, where I'm seeing the shift is the organizations that are thriving are encouraging and cultivating this sort of multi-skill mindset
Mhm.
in their teams, or bringing people in that are doing that. And those that aren't really are just, pushing code a little bit faster and not being able to really, harness the power of agentic software engineering.
And say with your clients, for example, or the existing discussions and new discussions that you're having, is there a baseline expectation? Because they don't necessarily care about who is doing the work and how many people and what tech stack. Maybe some are obviously quite fixed if they're coming from a tech background, but if we're talking kind of people on the business side rather than the technical side, what is the baseline expectation around delivery models and tooling that is being used, and how much AI and what kind of infrastructure and what kind of vendors you're using? Like, is there a bit of a trend as something that you've seen?
Well, my exposure for the last couple of years has been predominantly with small cash-strapped startups.
Yeah.
So we just want output. We want to
Yeah.
get products in the market as quickly as possible. So as far as the CEOs, the founders are concerned, they're not that worried. They really don't want to know or care in the nicest possible way about what the tech stack is.
Mhm.
All they really care about is output, getting things into market, being able to show investors, and the less money that we spend, the better.
Mhm.
Whereas organizations that are better funded might have additional considerations. So from a how work gets done, and from a personal perspective, the fewer people that are involved, the less friction and the faster you can move. So the focus really has been, how do you resource a team with the people that you can work with that can do things autonomously and not tread on each other's toes?
Mm-hmm.
And how can people contribute to engineering acceleration? So those are now the factors that I'm pressing onto people that I talk to, because previously, engineering has been this, and product delivery has been quite daunting for a lot of non-technical founders.
Mm-hmm.
As far as they're concerned, it's going to be a money pit. I need to hire, lots and lots of engineers. Maybe I'll go overseas because it'll be slightly cheaper. And often it is, and there are huge success stories in that, which obviously you're acutely aware of and have been a contributory part of. But the organizations that are smaller,
Mm-hmm.
they genuinely just care about output. So my job is to abstract the technology delivery away from them and say, hey, look, okay, let's co-create a problem in real time that we get that shipped, as opposed to write some requirements down and send it to a team so that we crank away for a few weeks before something comes back.
And are you finding, with the clients or the partners that you work with, are they coming to you with a significantly more advanced starting point? Because I remember before ChatGPT or before Anthropic and Claude and the other kind of PLLMs, the act of writing a requirement brief and getting all the information and doing business analysis, getting a view of exactly the problem that you want and how you're going to validate and some of the strategies for go-to-market. Like, those are all very complex skills to kind of learn as a founder that's trying to get something off the ground, and for you to have a full picture of everything that might impact the scope or where you start and what the strategy is. Whereas I'm sure that people are coming with a significantly more advanced starting point just through lessons learned from these LLMs that can help them get through all that strategy up front. Has that helped you to get the ball rolling faster, or has it made things slower, or what have you picked up on?
Well, there are always two sides to the story.
Yeah.
I think getting on board with the low-code tooling, like I don't know, Replit or Lovable, has been tremendously powerful, because a CEO or a founder can sit on their couch and sketch up what their SaaS needs to look like, or what their organization needs to be using reasonably quickly. And some of them just go hell for leather and just do it themselves, which is phenomenal. Then you've got the other side, which is, hey, Claude, make me some money. This is what I want to do. And Claude will be very, very happily, crank out a project plan, complete with resourcing requirements, what the tech stack needs to be, how they're going to make money. But often you look at this thing, and sometimes, even the word requirement isn't in there. It's a very, very vague statement, which Claude has diligently and helpfully turned into an entire business for you.
Yeah.
And it takes a little bit of time to say, hey, it's great that you're trying to be proactive here, but this isn't how you define an organization or define a business or define a piece of software. So I think the people that have really got on board with the tooling and understanding that this is we need to create an output, and this is what it to look like and feel like, and these are the things that I want to produce for my customers, have been very, very successful. Whereas the people that believe that if they just ask Claude to create their business, effectively one-shotting the whole thing, they're the ones that are sorely disappointed when someone comes over and says, I can't really do anything with this. Let's refine. And that's when I think their expectations of AI come crashing to the ground, because they don't necessarily understand how to use this extremely powerful tool.
Yeah, totally agree. I think, we've had some relatively good experiences, and, the people that have a bit of experience, because with founders, what I've seen is, or people that come up, everyone's got very good ideas, and the idea in a lot of cases is the hardest part. You've got the execution, which is the delivery of the idea in the most efficient possible way, and then actually going to market. That's when the rubber really hits the road in terms of like, have you put all the pieces together? And I think, some people have those ideas when they're on the couch, they come up and they talk to Claude or ChatGPT, one shot a business plan. But yeah, you have to be super, I guess, understanding of the industry, the vertical, the problem you're trying to solve, and everything along those lines. So, but where it has been quite beneficial for us is the people that do have a lot of clarity of what they want to do. It does actually expedite things, and then also, what we call it now is once, say that, for example, if vibe coded a solution, we call it like a functioning scope. So you actually have a working prototype that has been created. It's been validated by the business. It's validated the business need, whether it's in a small business or a sort of services-based organization where someone has an idea that they think they can solve a problem that they experience on a daily basis within their organization. But when that comes to us, it makes the business case so much stronger. And even for us to then transfer that knowledge, the starting point is significantly accelerated. So from what I've seen is, if you do have an idea and you do understand the tools, you can get that starting point much further along, and your chances of it getting off the ground or funded by your organization or by investors will be harder. Will be much more successful, purely because you've actually found the opportunity, defined it, and validated it as well. So we love those when they come across, and I couldn't advocate for more of those. And I'm sure you would agree.
Oh, 100%. And my personal philosophy is make sure engineering is out of the way.
Yeah.
Engineering and software delivery should be operating, in my opinion, faster than the business can consume it, rather than the other way around, which is historically being the case. So a lot of focus for the last, 3 to 6 months for me has been around the engineering automation. How do we get to a point where when someone thinks something, the next day it's in production and live, not just a working prototype? So that's really forced me to dig deep and try to think about the particular sorts of challenges. And I think what's been very, very interesting is AI assisted engineering isn't just doing the same things that you were doing before faster.
Yeah.
So for example, how do things normally work? You get some requirements. A team of developers might build things and peer review and code review, but ultimately you end up raising this pull request. Raise a pull request with the code that you've changed in order to get merged into your code base, and that can be built and delivered and shipped out the door. So often there are problems in which the person that is reviewing your code is busy. I had a situation where the engineering team was in Australia and the decision makers were in London. So even the smallest code change needed to go through a code review. So it could take a week just for a pull request to be approved. And it was a nightmare. But even if you're in the same geography, your tech lead is probably going to be busy doing stuff. Mm-hmm. You've got this friction point. We've got the developer waiting for something to be approved. Okay, fine. Let's make that faster. So initially it was, okay, fine. Let's make sure that there's a huge amount of automation. Oh, well, a pull request can come through. We can do deep security analysis on it. Have swarms of agents just looking at this pull request to see if there are any security issues, making sure code quality is absolutely top notch, that it's aligning to all the patterns. That still takes a while. It can still take, several minutes or possibly even hours to iterate, because the code that comes out of an LLM isn't always great. There are things that's going to get wrong and you need to fix them. So almost the problem moved a little bit. So the engineer was sitting there waiting for these code reviews to finish and, start changing things. And in fact, I would probably say the productivity didn't decrease, but it was actually on par. Like, the amount of things that were being shipped per unit time had changed. So rather than waiting for a tech lead to review your code, you'd be waiting for your team of agents to finish and for you to iterate. So that was a bit of a wake-up call, because I thought, we can speed things up and this is going to be faster. But you started observing and realizing that the developers are still banging their heads against the table, waiting for things to be fixed, even if it wasn't them that was fixing them. So I had to take a step back and have a think and say, okay, well, how do we do this in a slightly different way? So the approach that myself and my team is taking at the moment is to actually start thinking of things in horizontal slices. So what do I mean by this? You might be delivering a feature, and that feature could be to have a piece of functionality that ingests data a particular way and presents it on screen. Like, great. Traditionally, what you might do is you say, okay, I've got some UI automation here, but my unit tests and integration tests and so on and so forth, and I will run them on my pull request, and that is it. But like I said, that takes a very, very long time. So doing a rudimentary code review to make sure that there are no massive blockers before merging, but then having nightly processes in the matrix has been phenomenally powerful in reducing time. So what do I mean by this? So you've got your code base, it's going to have horizontal layers, you're going to have your database, data access layer, your APIs, your UI, and so on and so forth. And you've got your vertical slices of functionality, which will use one or more of your horizontal layers. So something that we set up last week in one of the projects was actually a nightly job, well, actually 10 nightly jobs. And what they would do is have a set of very specific agents to look at one horizontal slice. So let's say on a Monday, it might look at the data layer. And on a Tuesday, it might look at the API layer. On a Wednesday, it might look at the UI. So, horizontal slices. But in parallel, another set of agents whose only job is to look at verticals. So you slice your system, let's say to the marketplace, you might have an order management piece, you might have a payments piece, you might have a customer services slice. So you've got a set of agents whose only job is to look at the code and the application in that vertical slice. So by the end of the week, you've code reviewed and fixed most things in your code base on a rotating basis. So some of the people who are looking at this will probably go, oh my goodness, this is terrible. You're telling me that you're letting things leak into production and you only catch them in the evenings. Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how it works now. In manual software development, you're not going to catch everything. People are going to be reporting bugs. There are going to be issues. Someone might be working on a piece of code that someone else worked on 2 weeks later saying, I've just found a really big issue here. So I don't think that's new. But what I'm finding is leaving this drudgery to an overnight process, and you wake up in the morning, you just have a set of pull requests to review and say, okay, yep, these are the things it found, has been probably 2 to 5 times more effective in getting things out the door to a high level of quality in the aggregate than the initial approach I was taking to really deep dive on every single pull request. So that was surprising to me. But if you take a step back and say, okay, yeah, this is a completely different approach to delivering clean code. You're not doing it at the point that you're writing and merging it. You're doing it retrospectively. But because the iteration cycles are so short, it's completely okay. And the win is that you're just unblocked. You're getting things out the door. You can prototype things significantly faster. You can get things into production. And if you're doing that faster than the business can absorb it, you're probably winning. Because you're basically getting out of the way. You're letting the salespeople sell. You're letting the founders go off and get investment because they're being able to show the level of pace. So that's probably been the biggest learning for me in terms of how to accelerate software engineering.
Yeah, and I would, at a guess, imagine that your software development lifecycle has gone through a couple of iterations over, say, in 2026. Would you say it's evolved continuously? Because just where things are going and where the demand is and the technology and the tools that are available, the models, how many iterations would you say you've gone through over the last 12 months of what the optimum delivery model is?
I don't think I can even count the number of changes that we've made. And I'm definitely nowhere near an optimal delivery model. So I think the definition of that changes.
Yeah.
But I'd say the aha moments are when you try and think of things in slightly different ways and you see people actually adopting it. So a really good example is UX and experience design and user interface design, the aesthetics and so on and so forth. Have a designer, they're amazing, they use Claude Design. So they're writing a prompt and watching something change. It's phenomenal. But what's happening is, great, they've created a design and then they give it to the developer. What's the developer doing? They're writing the same things into another prompt to try and make it look the same. And it's very frustrating because, as far as the developers are concerned, they're trying to do things based on the tokens, the design systems they have, which aren't necessarily exactly the same as the SVG images that are being created in Claude Design. So we thought, let's do a little experiment. Like, hey, designer, you're writing prompts and seeing something change. Let's show you how to use Visual Studio Code. Check out the code, get an emulator running on your machine, and just type the prompts into Claude Code and see your React application change in real time.
Yeah.
And I was very, very proud of this this designer because on Monday I saw a pull request authored by them.
Yeah.
So we had a designer who's now so empowered that they can make changes to the code. And again, there are probably people sitting out there going, oh my goodness. But of course, it still goes through the same rigor and the same governance. All that we've done is, again, reduced a handoff.
Mm-hmm.
So the UI developer, they're having a great time because now they can focus on engineering. And say, okay, how do we tighten up UI testing and UI test automation? How can we have the agent fire up a headless browser, look at the screens, actually move the side of the sides of the screens to check it's responsive, to do try and build new components to allow the designer, who's now basically a front-end developer, to be even more empowered. So everything that they create is actually to a common design system. And the UI engineers were initially a little bit scared, saying, well, am I going to be out of a job because the designer's doing all the work? I'm like, only if you want to be. Let's focus on the things that aren't drudgery anymore, i.e. copy pasting things and making them look identical. We can give that to a machine now. Focus on the things that are fun to you. So that's only just emerged in the last week. I think there was the bizarre scenario that was me and a designer and a CEO on a Zoom call, and the founder was telling me something, and then I was telling the designer what to type in the prompt. So it started becoming completely absurd. So at that point, a light went on in my head saying, well, what if we just cut out the middleman here and see how we go? So I think that's probably been the latest iteration. And the one prior to that was the matrix-based evening jobs that fix your code. And I'm sure there'll be something that crops up next week.
Yeah. I mean, it's really a time where you can't just sit and where you can't just sit on one process. It just has to continually evolve. I think like right now, like there's also obviously being a human amongst all of this is obviously your most important superpower. I know it sounds crazy to explain it that way, but your input is actually the most valuable because at the end of the day, you're accountable for everything that's delivered. But also, I think, it's really important, for that to kind of really make sense in this kind of native delivery, like dark factory model kind of concept is you need to be continually learning and pushing the boundaries. And, that does really help when you've got leadership that's kind of allowing that sort of fast path to failure within some boundaries and guardrails, as they say. But you need to constantly keep pushing because once again, I don't think once you discover the most efficient path of delivering something, there's gonna be some friction that you meet along the way, and it's probably gonna feel very foreign and wrong. But then once you establish it, you've just cancelled out one other handoff, and then that goes downstream across the whole organization or the whole delivery life cycle, and then the benefits are felt across everywhere, both commercially and just purely productivity and sanity, right?
No, 100%. And I think trying to remain proactive is becoming increasingly harder because things are changing daily and you're having to react to things changing under your feet. So I think the phrase "keeping your head above water" hasn't been more relevant in history to what it is at the moment. Anthropic have got a stranglehold on at least enterprise, but also a lot of developers are purely conversant with Claude and nothing else. And if you go to YouTube, you'll just see content creators talking about Claude like it's going out of fashion. Understanding that there are other models out there is, again, I think an emerging skill. Well, I think probably about a month ago, it was Claude. As far as I was concerned, I'm just using Claude Code for absolutely everything and maybe ChatGPT to ask things. I don't know about some of the other engineers out there, but I've been finding that at least Anthropic have been struggling a lot keeping their service up and to a high level of quality. Latency of prompts has just been getting longer and longer. There are periods of time in which it's fast, but then sometimes it gets slow. Their cost model continues to change. Things are starting to become more expensive. So I've had to experiment. I'm using a coding harness now called Pi. So it's an open source coding harness built by a developer that hated all of the other coding harnesses because they were injecting way too many tool calls and cranking through tokens. And my daily driver is actually an open model called GLM 5.2. And GLM 5.2 is lightning quick. I'm using the one that's hosted by Olama, not sponsored, by the way. So I've got a terminal open there. When I want to do some creative work and prototyping, I actually switch to Sol, which is OpenAI's GPT 5.6. And as far as Claude's concerned, I use Claude Code Web and give it the long-running tasks. Say, hey, go off and do this analysis, or go off and do some testing for me, and I'll come back. So that was a reaction. That was a reaction to Claude suddenly starting to become really, really slow. Becoming proactive again is, okay, well, how do we bake this into our processes? How do we make sure that we know when prompts are getting slow? And there are some tools out there and some services like Pulsetic that I use for website monitoring that have started rolling out weather forecasts for the various different models. So having a job that runs on a regular basis, just asking the model to count to 10 or count to 50 for you, and just providing a quick little alert to devs in Slack going, oh, by the way, this one's running a little bit slow, or this model's running a bit slow, is an example of how to go back onto the front foot when it comes to model selection. So I think trying to remain proactive is becoming increasingly harder, but there are ways to do that. But you just have to think about something you're reacting to and how to really amp it up to the next level.
Yeah. Truer words never told. Well, I think we've managed to hammer through the agenda without me really prompting too much, no pun intended. But in terms of, I guess, in terms of pressure that's being experienced at board level, have you had much experience with founders or executives that are getting certain pressure of implementing or using AI, and for them to try and find the winning strategy with it? Whereas it's very hard to, I don't think I've spoke to anyone that has the winning strategy right now because it's all so new. So have you been exposed to much of that at the moment? Or what kind of conversations have you been involved in?
I'm quite lucky in so far as the clients I work with are reasonably pragmatic in terms of the adoption of new technology. But I have seen things anecdotally or being party to meetings in which the prevailing view is AI equals more money. That's it. If I say AI enough, it's magic's fairy dust. I'll sprinkle it over the business, and all of a sudden, I'm sitting in piles of cash driving a new car. It doesn't really work that way, but unfortunately, sometimes it's like the emperor's new clothes. If you say something that is challenging the prevailing view in their ecosystem, that it suddenly becomes a situation which you're thought of as a Luddite. So you do have to be very measured and careful in terms of how you're messaging and responding to these sorts of not entirely unreasonable expectations. But by purchasing a subscription to Claude, or by measuring how many dollars of tokens your engineers are spending, and say, this person's spending $3,000 or $4,000 a month on tokens, therefore they must be good. And why aren't you doing the same thing? Token spend is just a number. It doesn't actually indicate whether or not you're good or bad, or being productive or not productive. But I think that's probably a lot of the hype. You're looking at blogs, you're in your sort of in your bubble, thinking, okay, if I say AI enough, everyone will just kind of know what to do. I haven't seen that be particularly effective.
Yeah. And I think, if we look back over this discussion alone, you can push for AI at board level, but there's obviously a lot of change management that has to happen for it to actually be meaningful and actually have that impact and value that you're probably expecting as well. Because chances are everyone's still trying to learn and figure out the best way to deliver it and actually give you what you want.
Oh, 100%. Again, I'll just go back to the beginning. Measure. If you can't measure it, it's not happening. So how are you going to measure the impact of adopting AI? And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that I've had is have some metrics at board level, at senior leadership level. I am going to be spending money, but more importantly, time in the organization at implementing something. How can I measure its output so that I can decide if it's even a good investment or if I need to change approaches?
Yeah. And look, I guess just in sort of closing, I'd love to get your views on where you think things are heading. What does the next 6 to 12 months look like in the tech industry? Obviously, knowing the leaps that we've taken in the last 6 to 12 months, do you think it's going to slow down? Do you think your software development life cycle is going to look exactly the same in 6 to 12 months' time? Yeah, what are your views?
Oh boy, I don't think I can even talk about 6 to 12 months. Like the trends at the moment are all over the news. The U.S. government trying to put export controls on powerful models, or OpenAI claiming that one of their models went wildly out of control and hacked Hugging Face. Chinese AI overtaking American AI with fewer guide rails, costs going up, measurability going down. I think it would be remiss of me to start talking about trends. All I can talk about is the here and now. And based on what's happening at the moment, all I think is going to happen is the number of models out there are going to go up. The overall quality of output is going to go up. I think that there's going to be more regulation in terms of the use of AI as a weapon, but also maybe as something that could contribute to unemployment and so on and so forth. I think things are heading in that direction, and that's probably a natural progression. As for what's going to happen, on the ground, I can't really tell, other than it's just going to continue changing because it's just such a fast-moving space. Sorry, this isn't me with a crystal ball talking about the next 6 to 12 months, but unfortunately, it's changing so quickly. It's very hard to say.
Yes, spoken like a true agent of change, Shariq. So
Excuse the pun, yeah.
Yeah. Look, you're right in the thick of it, and I think that, these discussions being out in the open, I think will help a lot of people have a bit of a reality check of what's coming, how to approach it, how should they think about their career if they're a developer, how you should think about it as a business owner, and how can you embrace it, and kind of what how people are attacking and solving problems these days as well. So, look, an absolute pleasure having you on today. We have some very good chats, and very glad that you're within our orbit. We're obviously partners, and look forward to obviously working together on many more initiatives as well. But thanks for having you on today, and have a good day.
Oh, cheers, Dmitry. It's been super fun, and I'm sure we'll catch up very, very soon.
No worries. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate.